just have a look on the some of these conversation pieces that I brought with me today. So these are some postcards. This particular one, even though it doesn't look like, this is from 1915. Wow. So it's like, I mean, almost close to 110 years, but it's holding up pretty well.
Can I touch it here?
Yeah, of course.
1915.
I cannot believe the quality. It's so.
Yeah, it's a special postcard issued in commemoration for the Joseon expedition that they held at Gyeongbokgung in 1915.
I was going to say, is that Gyeongbokgung in the background?
Yep.
Wow.
And they have sort of like the autumn foliage there as well.
Yeah. Well, it was in October, so.
It's interesting to see the colours of the hanbok.
Right. Well, that's of course the
1950.
The wonsam and all that. And here we have some. These are bookmarks featuring all these prominent and pretty kisaengs, popular kisaengs of the 1920s, or late 1920s and early 30s. And I suspect there were many more than these, but this is what I have. But at least it comes with the original.
Show me a 1920s kisaeng.
Kisaeng, like bookmarks, When I was young, of course, they used to make plastic. Book cover, book thingies, with actresses, on them. So I guess it's kind of like the similar idea, but it's a very rare thing to spot these days.
It's amazing to consider how beauty might have changed.
Of course.
And our understanding of
things have the ideal body types has changed, the ideal face has changed. Of course, I mean it's going to be something that we're going to talk a little bit if we have time for this.
And we're meant to smile now, aren't we? Like in the old photos, it was very sort of taciturn and stoic expressions.
And these people are trying to smile, of course, in some of these things. Because they are far much more.
Right.
Which one?
This one.
Referring to this one.
She caught my eye.
Yeah.
I was like, what's her phone number?
Kim Wol-hong. Kim Wol-hong. Yep.
Kim Wol-hong.
So we have names of them.
Yeah. How's your Hanja, Yunso?
My Hanja.
Yeah. How's your Chinese?
I cannot really read that, but I know my name.
You know your name.
Yeah.
Okay.
Some of these people had rather interesting life. This one. Sang Yeon-hong, who is still touted as one of the most beautiful persons of the late 1920s, early 30s. I think she was around 18 when she took that photo. Wow. She was born in 1911. Well, she ended up living the rest of her life in Shanghai, of all places. Married an Englishman. She was a dancer, among many things. She briefly worked as a singer and made a couple of records, I think. And but anyway, so all these people were they were trained as professional entertainers, of course. It's a kind of a misnomer to call them kisaengs as courtesans or prostitutes, because there were many more. Much more than that. So and of course it's a different type of, how to put this, gender. I'm not, of course, condoning any of this. I'm just saying that it was, a very different form of, gender positioning or whatever you call it. I'm not gonna go too much of a buzzword on today, but.
So what were they? How do we understand their position in society?
Well, traditionally, of course, kisaengs. Pre-modern Korea did not necessarily have a sanctioned form of legal prostitution. There was no such thing. Kisaengs did exist since the Goryeo period, but then they were all governed or employed by the state. So there were no how should I put it? There were no private enterprise who were behind all these people. But of course, so by 1907, the Japanese when tried to modernize it, they modernized Korea, as they called it. They ended up abolishing the kwangi system, the state-owned, state-controlled kisaeng system.
Yeah.
So everybody from then on was just of their own. They were all they technically had a free reign, but of course it wasn't like that, of course. So yeah, and of course the form of they were, of course, they served the patrons who paid for them, and yeah, some might say, of course, it's a form of prostitution, but then you know, yeah, sex was not even like much of their first concern anyway. It was more, it was mostly just entertaining, like mostly singing, dancing, and all kinds of other like performative arts that they performed. But then of course the you know, the how to put this, the bad publicity sort of like stuck. I mean, Kisaeng like system officially was abolished in 1946, and whereas after that, of course, there was no one like that. But you know, practically every like performative arts done by women in like, I mean, traditional performative arts as we call them. Without Kisaengs, we wouldn't have any of them, right? Be it traditional singing, like dancing, like whatever. Like we wouldn't have any of those without these people. These people were basically like carrying the torch, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I mean, they were like the social class who were actually, you know, doing this professionally. I mean, they were the only ones who were doing that. So yeah, it's kind of like convoluted, and of course, it's. I mean, I'm not trying to simplify any of these delicate, like, you know, matters, but then. You know, if you go onto the internet these days, you know, many of these, you know, people, without understanding the context, I'm going to talk a lot about the context, historical context, but without understanding, you know, context, people are just saying, oh, you know, like Kisaengs were just prostitutes. Why are you glorifying them? No, I mean, they were not. Like, they were much more than that. They occasionally had transactional form of, like, you know, like sex, but you know, it was not the biggest concern, biggest, like, you know, priority that they had. And you know, of course, gender norms and, you know, things, you know, sexuality, of course, in general, was like had drastic changes over the last 100 years or so, and it is kind of dangerous, I think. You know, I mean, yeah, I'm not glorifying any of that either, but you know, without actually knowing the context, just, you know, dismissing it is just kind of like, you know, like it leads to nowhere. Before
we talk about any of the context surrounding them, the songs and the dances that they did, can we still see them today? I mean, I sometimes go to performances and I see the sort of the duct things and the songs that come out. Is there a link there, or are they so far removed? Or?
I would say that, but then, you know, the way we understand and imagine Korean traditions, Korean national culture, or like Koreanness in general, it's a very complicated matter. Nothing, of course, is. Many people have this understanding, and in fact, I think Korean like formal education, like you know, system of like, you know, formal education we have in Korea, does try to like put implications in people's mind that all these like traditional culture that we have are, you know, something that is like that has been preserved and, you know, intact for the last, you know, like few hundred years or so, whereas in fact most of the like genres and typical forms of dances or singing or like music, whatever, yeah, they had undergone you know, significant amount of modifications and changes, for better or worse. And some forms of singing or some types of genres of music were left intact or even encouraged for the fact that they many of these Korean cultural elites, which is of course my focus on my own like Ph.D. like research, they glorified and tried to like exalt these things as a representative aspect of the Korean culture. Because they thought it was worthy and had some value, like, almost like educational value to them. Whereas certain other forms of, you know, like music or singing or like dancing were like suppressed or like just taken out of their existence, so to speak, because they thought they were like either too vulgar or like just not worthy or even just too dilettante. So yeah, so it's just yeah, there were quite a lot of picking and choosing, like process of picking and choosing, cherry picking was actually happening. So I find it rather problematic, and that's actually one of the driving factors that I'm actually working on this particular subject in my own research, because again, not many people know about this, not many people recognize this. So yeah.
Professor Jihoon Suk at Seoul National University, I believe, he taught me, or he spoke about the idea of Yangbanhwa, Yangbanization, and in that he was saying how in the past, in the Joseon dynasty, it would be the Yangbans and the elites who would bow and do the very formal language, while those of a lower class would be much more vulgar.
Of course.
And he wasn't specifically speaking about the music and the arts, but I guess that would be the same process.
Yeah, Yangbanization is, it's an interesting term, although I do not wholeheartedly agree with that, because there were times when a lot of these cultural, like Korean cultural elites were very critical about Yangban in general, because they thought of them, sometimes they would thought of them as, lacking in, how to put this, progressivism, or lacking in, I don't know, lacking in courage, lacking in modesty, or whatever. So yeah, all kinds of different things. And of course, it's kind of funny that many of modern Koreans would think of Yangbans as being, very modest forms, like more modest types of people. But of course, that was not how early 20th century Koreans would think about themselves. Yangbans were often attacked of being, being just like wasting their money on how to put this, fleeting things, and just follies, and all kinds of different things. So I think in a sense what I can say is that a lot of these Korean cultural elites try to impose this understanding of the essence of Yangban culture, which they thought, which is a very glorified, whitewashed version of it. But then, they would try to impose these things on different forms and aspects of Korean culture, all kinds of Korean cultures, be it clothing, or like housings, and food, and like performative arts and language, just manners. Everything was was sort of there was this kind of what do you call it, cookie cutter, so to speak, patterns that they just really want to push these different things and try to remold them into this thing, into this new form that they thought was worthy of being preserved. So yeah, that's how I think about it.
There's two things I want to ask you here, and they're very personal. They're not deep, but it's just because I have you here, I want to abuse my privilege. The first is the nongak song, rather than pantory, Ongheya. Do you know any? Because the first time I heard that song, I love that. And I listened to 1970s versions of it and traditional versions. Is that farmers' music? Is that?
No.
Okay.
The earliest attainable form of it comes out of a commercial recording made in 1938.
Okay.
And we do know who composed it. Nobody was going to tell you. It was two folk musicians from Ulsan. So it does have some basis in folk music. So, and of course the lyrics, at least some parts of it, does come from the regional Ulsan, forms of. How to put it, they picked it up, they wrote it down, and they just made a, refrain, and just things like that we now know. But it was first introduced as commercial sound recording in 1938, and I have it actually, not with me today, but I have it in my archive. And it was quite popular because it was catchy.
It's catchy, yeah. Those people have got good taste,
and I know it was quite prominently featured on the radio as well throughout the 30s and 40s. They were actually, in fact, they actually brought some folk musicians from Ulsan, where it the writers had come from, and they were featured on the radio a couple of times, I think. So yeah, and so many different forms of so-called folk songs. In fact, most of the folk songs, traditional songs, as you might know, none of these things go back beyond early 1930s.
Wow.
None of them. All the regional Arirangs, be it Jindo Arirang or Mirang Arirang or whatever you name it, they're all manufactured, composed. We do know who wrote these things. Jindo Arirang, for instance, was written by Kim So-hee, who first recorded it in 1935. And same thing applies to pretty much everywhere. And Arirang certainly became this huge thing that is that people just thought of it as a kind of essence of Korean culture. So it was just going everywhere. In fact, of course, I brought a couple of Arirang recordings, which I'm trying to use as my point, like as we go along. So
it's not just that it's young; it's that it was. And what were they called? Because people's folk art would be like minhwa. What would
Minyo?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Minyo is the word.
Thank
but
you,
then, if you read the original descriptions on the original labels of these recordings, they would go Shinminyo because it was new.
Okay.
But then, and they had a very strong opinion. A lot of these cultural elites, be it composers, lyricists, or like record producers, radio producers, or film producers, even, and a lot of them, like a lot of times, all these roles were played by like a couple of people. Really, I mean, you're talking like same people over and over and over. So they had a very strong idea about this decidedly low lifeness of these folk songs, because they thought a lot of them were just too vulgar, too uneducational, and they really wanted to like change the situation, because they really thought Koreans have no future, so to speak. I mean, there was a very strong ideological motive behind all these people, because they really, I mean, a lot of these people, they were generally considered to be nationalist, although politically speaking, like they were not necessarily like hardcore militant forms of like nationalists. They were far much more milder form. In fact, quite a number of them, in fact, ended up, especially in the 40s, at the very brink of the at the beginning of the Japan's wartime expansions, they were like sort of like collaborative a lot of times. So I wouldn't call them like militant nationalists, or like just somebody we can just like like glorify. But then they had this sense of feeling that many of these people, like I mean Koreans in general, in particular, like lost their country, and like they are at the brink of extinction as a race, and they really wanted to change the situation, so to speak, so that they can actually pass down like this like essence of the Koreanness to the future generation. But then they had all these ideas that we have to whitewash, we have to modify, we have to like do something about it, because without it, if you just carry on like something that was before, it's a continuation of all these factors that led to colonization. So they really had very strong opinions about that. So that actually also drove these people into like modifying, and they were not thinking of them as they were not saying, oh, we are modifying it, we are not we are not creating something that did not exist before. They were just saying, oh, we are just making modifications. We are making modifications. We're not like changing everything. We're not like, we're just making some modifications so that we can make everything like family friendly, so to speak. Case in point, there was this song. It's not a well-known song now, but it was tremendously popular in the early 1900s. It's called Bombok Taryong. Very few people nowadays sing it today. Originally, it was a song about a woman who is making a bombok, sort of like a, I don't know, how should I put it, some kind of like, duck, maybe, rice cake of some kind. But she is using this to, seduce a couple of men around her. In town, and she managed to so she gives two men her pumbo, and later in that evening, it's a sort of like a narrative song. Later that evening, one of the guys show up at her doorstep, and they have sex. But then the second guy barges in. and pandemonium ensues, and in the end, well, she loses both of them, and she's just left there like lonely and whatever. So but then this was a very popular form of like singing, and people like frequently sang it. So we have some early recordings of it made in the 1920s and early 30s. But then starting around 1934-ish, Korean record producers, when they were getting increasingly more like having more control over their repertoires, they thought this was no good. So they completely modified the song. So now it's, like if you listen to the song now, the way that it is sung today, like it means nothing really. I mean, it's just random words and like verses from some poetries and whatnot that nobody understands. I mean, there's no rhyme or reason, there's no context, there's no like flow of narrative or anything, like no story. But then it is what it is now. But then that of course ended up making it more obscure now, because nowadays because who's gonna sing something that has no context or no narrative or no feeling? So
a few K-pop artists maybe.
I don't know. So so that's just one example, and there are plenty more, but there had been many attempts, many like active like involvement from these cultural elites, mostly well-educated, like Western educated mostly, and they had they were actively involved in cultural production activities like stage play. Writing plays and staging like play and producing films, radio, whatnot. But then these are the ones who really pushed it through throughout the colonial period, and then all the way up to some of these people ended up continuing working on this kind of like role all the way up to the 1960s. And after that, even after they retired from the active role, they ended up becoming the experts. These are the ones who were behind on all these major decisions of making, like designating intangible cultural assets, for instance, in the 1960s and 70s. And so, and some of them ended up becoming sort of like quote unquote folklorist, and stayed on the like academia and like talked about and wrote about and lectured about all the notions of the Koreanness that as they saw fit. And I think a lot of their legacy is still more or less continuing to the unsuspecting like masses, so to speak. A lot of Korean academics, of course, most Korean academics do see this problem, that a lot of the like common like conceptions about Koreanness or Korean culture or like whatever, it's you can't just accept it for its face value. So most people, like most musicologists, historians, folklorists, anthropologists, they know about this problem for decades now, but it's not something that that has become some kind of a common knowledge to the rest of the people. So
now there is democracy, open, flourishing democracy. Maybe that will come. I love the idea what you were describing, how people in the 1930s, in the present, they were creating a version of the past for the future. They were trying to leave a legacy. Before the second question that I had for you, other than Ong Hye-ya, was in Richard Rutt's work, and this is related to the Kisaengs we were talking about. In Richard Rutt's work, he talked about during the sort of late Joseon dynasty, there would be traveling groups of performers and artists, and these would include male prostitutes. And
사당패.
One more time,
사당패, as they were called.
One of the first movies I ever saw in the Korean cinema was Hwanghae Namja. And so I've talked about this a little bit in my class, but I just wanted to ask you, I mean, you spoke about how we should understand the Kisaengs in context. I've read Richard Rutt's work and others. How do we understand the male prostitute? Was that a thing?
It was. I mean, it was a very nobody made, nobody, like, how do I put this? Nobody tried to conceal it when it was around. 사당패 has 사당패, or later, and the male prostitute ones, like sometimes so there were traveling troops of, like, I wouldn't call them circus, but they would do all kinds of acrobatics and things, or dances or singing. So there were like this type of like troops, roaming about. And Sadangpe started off as, believe it or not, it had a very strong religious connections. It started off as sort of like how to put this, lay people working on behalf of Buddhist temples to collect donations. So that was the initial form of it. So many of these, so we have our earliest references to them from the late 15th century, 1480s and onward. So we have some of these forms, and like part of the reason why they were doing all this was that Joseon, as we know, was actively suppressing Buddhism. It was completely different. Goryeo, of course, the royals and the rest of the society and the aristocrats openly and actively supported Buddhist, Buddhist, temples and monasteries, but that was not the case. It was not allowed. Like they had strict restrictions about not to do so, and so Sadangpe started off as these lay people, community of lay people, actively trying to collect donations for these temples. So we have all the references about that. And some of these people, so the whole Wang and Namja, even though of course it's a complete work of fiction, we do know that some of these troops were actually called into into the like royal households and palaces to perform, because we do have references about them. And these types of people, the ones who actively frequently appeared in front of the royals, were called sande. Sande is a kind of like complex terminology. Sande literally means mountain platform. What that was they create this wooden platform in the shape of a mountain, and they will climb up on each of these little peaks, made out of wooden platforms, and would perform on that. So it was very elaborate form of that. But after the Imjin Wars of 1592 to 1599. Most of these people just most of these sandaes or even sadangs, most of their connections with Buddhist temples and things were completely severed, either because that the temple was no longer there, it was destroyed. Either it was destroyed, or they were just not in the best of shape, so to speak, to maintain themselves, or having this kind of patronage of some kind to these lay people. So after that, it was mostly just performative groups. Although there were maybe at least a couple of groups up to the early 20th century that boasted about connections, this old connections to this particular temple, for instance, Cheongyongsa in Ansong, for instance. But by the late 18th century and onward, it was known as a group of prostitutes, male prostitutes and female prostitutes. Sometimes there were all male prostitutes, all male groups, called namsadang. So and of course namsadang, if you go to Jamsil, it's Jamsil, you have Seoul Norimadang, not far from Lotte World. And sometimes they do this reimagined form of namsadangpe, performances in there once in a while. Wow. And of course these are all professionals. These are not they have no connections, no personal or ancestral connections to any of the original namsadangpe, because they ceased to exist by the early 1930s. But then the name just carries on, and any kind of traditional acrobatics types of work, they just associate closely with namsadangpe. But few people realize that namsadangpe was predominantly sort of a prostitution group. But then it was their way of like making a living. Again, prostitution was severely controlled. I mean, it was severely restricted by the Joseon court. There was no form of transactional sex available for the majority of Joseon society, and yet, there was always a need and demand for those. And so, and these people apparently just went into the niche, so to speak, about like to the people, like, and catered them, so to speak, in a way. Again, I'm not condoning or like, I'm not trying to glorify any of these things. I'm just talking about it as a fact. And when I say male prostitute, they were catering to males. So it was a form of homosexual encounters, which is also pretty shocking to quite a lot of people. But then that's what it was, and there were, like, again, the sarangpaes with the girl, with the women involved. Of course, their husbands would be would serve the role of a pimp, and just like he will share, so to speak, of his wife to other people who would have the big pockets and that kind of stuff. So again, it's not something that we can understand or condone in our modern societies. But then it was just happening. I mean, there were plenty of other cultures, I have to add, that did operate in a similar way. I mean, they will do some dances and forms of performative art, but then they also involved a lot of prostitution. In fact, I mean, all the glory days of the Tudor and Jacobean English stage, like Shakespeare and whatnot, like a lot of people, and especially after the Restoration period, the first generation of actresses that they featured in the English stage after the Restoration, they were mostly prostitutes. So again, you do need to have some form of context to understand these things.
In the Korean context, I think it's interesting that we learn from the history, or from what you say, that homosexuality is not new here. It's not something that's come from the West.
No.
It's not but that's the way it's presented, or that's the way it's perceived.
Well, yeah,
sometimes.
that's
why
that's
I
a
think
propaganda, mostly Christian propaganda. We do have a very strong presence, historical presence about homosexuality, male to male, homosexuality in particular. And I recently came across with this bizarre court document in which there were two men, both of them were merchants, and they had homosexual encounter on the way to the market, and somehow the older one started to have second thoughts about the money that the other guy had. So he killed him, and took his money, and just escaped to the countryside, but then was caught. And so the document I read was from the Ministry of what was it? Ministry of Justice, I think, and at the turn of the 20th century, actually. And he was confused whether he has to convict him. Whether he has to convict him for the killing, like being a bandit of some kind, or being an adulterer, because both of them were married. So, so in the end, they just ended up, charging him for the bandit, for the extortion and banditry, and executed him. But
not for the adultery.
Yeah.
So I'm from England. We put people like Oscar Wilde in jail for that,
course,
not too long ago.
Oh, at the same time, around the same time. Like, I'm talking 1900 for this particular case. And I mean, Wilde was convicted in 1897, I believe. Yeah. So.
Yonsei, if you have any questions about Korean history while Jihoon is, I suggest you just ask him. It's like, my history professor said this, is that right? Just ask. I'm going to ask one more here. When David Mason was on, because you were talking about Buddhism, and you were talking about the temples and people going around collecting money. I love David Mason, by the way. So this is, I'm not trying to put his words on the spot. In one of the stories he told me was that from 1392, from the start of the Joseon Dynasty, Buddhist monks did not come into Seoul.
Yeah, they couldn't.
And when the Japanese took over, they sort of said, "Where are all the monks? This is stupid. Bring them back in." So there's an element of truth to that.
Yeah. The official Joseon Code of Law, Gyeonggukdaejeon, explicitly states This was compiled in 1487, but then most of the law that was compiled in this volume was already in effect at the very beginning of the Joseon Dynasty, and it's specifically says that no Buddhist monk should be allowed to enter the gates of Seoul. So there was a provision of that kind, which was in effect until 1894, when all the forms of old Joseon Code of laws were abolished.
Is that the Kabo?
The whole Kabo Geok, yes. But then the whole encounter, so to speak, the whole fascination of so. If you go back to early 20th century history of Korean Buddhism, you see quite a lot of pro-Japanese activities happening. Many people in the leadership of Korean Buddhism at the time were openly pro-Japanese, largely because they thought that the Japanese Buddhists were the ones who were supporting them. They were the hopes. These people were the hope. Were this big hope that would ultimately abolish the systematic form of discrimination that they had to endure for centuries. And of course there was a large context behind that. Starting off in the late 1870s, many Japanese Buddhist orders, the Zodo order, Zodo sect, began to send Buddhist missionaries to Korea. Largely because they were also being suppressed by the Japanese nationalists, the Shinto nationalists, who thought that Buddhism was a foreign influence, and that has to be reduced in power or authority. So they really wanted to suppress them. So in order to survive, so to speak, they wanted to spread their influence to Korea. So starting off in the late 1870s, you started to see a lot of Buddhist missionaries from Japan roaming about in Korea, but because they were foreigners, they were not subjected to Korean code of law, and of course that meant that they could do whatever, they can go whatever they want, they could ride horses, they could do they could wear fancy clothing and whatnot. So this shocked Korean Buddhists because here you have all these people.
Were there laws against riding horses? I'm sorry to interrupt. Were there laws against riding horses?
Yeah. No, they were not allowed to do so, because it was only reserved for the higher officials and whatnot. So you're not supposed to do so. Anyway, and of course they were being constantly drafted Korean monks were constantly being drafted, against their will. To build bridges, fortresses or whatnot. So hard labor. So practically they had almost social social pariah kind of status. So for centuries, and of course, it's I'm just trying to simplify things here. So some temples ended up becoming very prominent and prospering in certain ways due to the big patronage from Yangban families, prominent Yangban families. That was happening. And even some royals kings and queens and princes, they were personally supporting them. So after maybe 1600s and onward, a lot of personal patronage was happening again. But then, overall, in the whole sense of things, many Korean Buddhists felt that they were just being suppressed by this unjust form of government as they saw it. And then so the Japanese were to them was this beam of hope. So
it makes sense that it would be.
So a lot of these monks would actually go to Japan to study and become very pro-Japanese. And of course, when all these restrictions and sanctions against the Buddhists were abolished in 1894, of course, with a heavy Japanese influence as well, they thought this was the right time. We had to play much more prominent role. And of course, there were so the ultimate outcome out of that was to build a temple within the gates of the Old Seoul, and they got their wish in 1910, the year that Korea was annexed by Japan, in the form of Gakwangsa, which is now the predecessor of Chogesa. Chogesa, whatever they say, whatever they claim about their history and lineage, that temple did not exist in that form until 1910, and it was sort of like their wish, coming true that we are finally building up a temple within the gates of Seoul, and of course this symbolizes that the Buddhists finally won again, won the battle against this unjust form of suppression and like discrimination that they thought. So yeah, again, so complex things. Without like, I'm not saying that all Buddhists in Korea were pro-Japanese, Chinilpa or whatever. I'm not saying any of that, but again, you need to have a certain amount of context to understand what was going on, and and it really helps you a lot to understand what was going on, at the time. So about society as a whole, and the way that people thought about things, and all that. So. Yeah, again, like David Mason, of course, he has a fine understanding of like the whole history of Buddhism in Korea, and I think what he basically told you is pretty much correct, I think.
Well done, David Mason. He's going to... One more, and then Yonsei, please fire some at Jihoon. In Gregory Henderson's book, Korea Vortex of the Politics, written in 1965, I think, he says that and none of these questions are written down, Jihoon, so if you say, I'm sorry, I don't know that, it's totally fine. He said that the slavery population of Joseon reached about 40% by 1700s, and after that it declined. I've had Mark Peterson tell me similar stories.
Oh, yeah.
Can you, say something about Nobi, Noye, slavery, how we understand that? Is it...
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of an unfortunate, like, lost in translation moment. And again, and this is a very hotly debated topic in, like, all forms of, like, social media and all that kind of thing, because they want to shock, like, so many of these people, like, posting TikTok videos or whatever, trying to shock their audience by saying, oh, Joseon had 40%, 40% of the population of Joseon were all, like, slaves. No, Nobi is more closer, in essence, the way that they, their mode of existence were far much more resembles to that of serfs, medieval European serfs rather than slave. So because again, like slaves do not have a complete autonomy of things, whereas of course Korean nobis did have some form of, first of all they had legal rights. They were allowed to have their properties. Their owners could not, take them. And they were allowed to get married and have children of their own. They were raised. They could raise the family. It was not like, it was very, very rare. I mean, I'm not saying it did not happen, but it was a very rare case for any Nobi families to be split up by their owners and to be sold off. And selling Nobis were very like, it was not a thing.
Okay.
It was not. They were not considered them as, they were like a typical Joseon person, Joseon Yangban, would not consider like a Nobi a property. So it was a big difference. It's not like they were not commodifying these people as their own personal properties or anything. So it's a misnomer, I would say. But then up to about 1640 to about 1700. I mean, we don't have like complete like data of like population of Joseon at the time, but yeah, you might say that about 35 to about 40% of the population were nobis. But after that, it starts to decline. The number of nobis begin to decline quite drastically, largely because for two things. One was that because of the devastations that occurred throughout much of the 16th and the 16th and the 17th century, the Imjin, like the Hideyoshi invasions and the Manchu invasions and all these devastating wars, Joseon court, the government itself, had a very severe shortages on taxations and like the way that like to collect taxes and or to collect any form of like budget in as a whole. So they began to sell these sort of like what they call 공명첨, literally blank certificate, for anyone who had any money in their pocket. They can just grab it by paying it to the local authorities, and Myeoncheon, like becoming escaping the outcast, the pariah, thing was a very common thing. So many nobis, because they were allowed to have possessions, collected money, and bought themselves out of the way. And well, they actually even went further, because starting in around 1800s, late 1700s, yangban's, poor, not much of a means yangban's began to sell their titles. And it was heavily discouraged by the authorities. That's not something that the Korean authorities wanted to do, Joseon authorities wanted to do. But then it was happening, and so many of these nobi turned yangmin, like common people, bought these titles as well. So just becoming more or less of an upstart in social in upper class social hierarchy. So so if you go to, let's say, by 1860s, the last how to put this, last national census of any kind was done in 1884. And well, of course, but 1884, it's a fragmentary, so we usually go for 1860. So 1860 thing, if you go through this, you only have less than 10 to about 12% of nobis, in the whole country by this point. So most of these people ended up becoming just, common people and whatnot. And it was far much better for the Joseon court, in the sense that nobis were not allowed to, they were not subjected to taxations, but then common people were. So it was, in effect, was a very smart way for them to have more taxations at hands. So so having, and again, having this negative connotations about nobi, and calling them as slaves. It was a terminology that they used. Especially in the early days of first generation of Korean studies scholars, be it Henderson or Wagner or whatever, and of course, some of the first generation Peace Corps volunteers, and people of course Mark Peterson would still use that terminology, but again, you have to be very cautious about that.
Yeah. Language changes, and so does our understanding. Yunso, any curiosities about Joseon of the past or history while Jihoon's here?
By the way, I was very interested about nobi being so different from the slavery, because in the contents dramas or movies, there are nobi actors who does very law things, they do these things to their masters, but in fact they were just working people for the upper people, not very much of a slavery thing. So it was very interesting to hear that.
So again, but the fact of the matter is, we don't actually know that how these people had, what kind of manners or social protocols that they these nobi people had had to show to the upper class, or somebody who was in the higher social hierarchies. We don't know. We don't really know this, because again, this is a problem that we always have to face when it comes to talking with Joseon histories or whatnot, because we don't really necessarily have vernacular rendering of everyday conversations of any people from this time period. Hangul was, Onmun, or whatever you call it. There were vernacular forms of writing, but then even the ones that were using these, even the ones who were using the vernacular script, they were not recording conversation thing. In fact, it was just not a thing for any societies as a whole. Nobody was actually writing things down. It was a very stylistic form of things. Literary forms of things. So we don't necessarily understand or know anything about the terminologies. In fact, we don't even know anything about how people in the early 1900s Korea would actually speak. We do have some evidence, of course. Sound recordings does help, but then there are so many expressions and different tones and intonations and things that that is essentially foreign to us. Well, you might just try to listen to it, but half of the, it is a form of Korean, but if half of the vocabulary that that you can hear on these recordings, like, you don't actually know anything about them, like, what are you going to do with it? I mean, it's essentially foreign to us.
Yeah.
I'm like, and of course all the other like scholars, experts, and literature, literature historians and all that, and linguists, they do know that. They are trained to go through this and understand what they're saying. But not many people, like everyday Koreans, actually understand that. So, and of course that brings it to the one of the questions you actually wrote about. I did watch the Pamyo and of course Mr. Sunshine or any of the things. I mean, not necessarily because I wanted to, like, I was actively going for it, but so many people asked my opinions about it over the years, and I had to watch it. Yeah, and it's kind of like, for me, it's, I don't know how to put it, but yeah, it could be kind of like some of them does make me cringe. Like, I mean, like, I have problems with it. And of course, largely for two things mostly. Nobody in any of these like history dramas, I mean, Pamyo is kind of like different, but so-called like period dramas that they feature, 시대극 or 사극 or whatever. I mean, but we don't have this like old school form of like saguks, like history dramas that I grew up with in the late 90s, early 2000s anymore. We don't have that that form of like acting or directions or anything. We don't have any of those now. But yeah, nobody speaks in the correct form of like Korean language as I mean, everybody speaks 21st century Korean.
Right.
Like, and that really bugs me like crazy. And of course, I'm not saying that. Of course, I understand that like it is nearly impossible for modern day audience to understand any of these words, old words or old forms of speeches. And of course, I mean, it would be big challenge to the actors too. But I'm not saying that we have to revert it back. But at least just give a little try. I mean, just give little effort. Try to make it slightly more, I don't know, archaic. I don't know. Like, I mean, yeah, it's not that difficult. But then most people, like most shows that I see, don't really do that. So they don't do that. And of course, the way that they picture things, be it costumes or be it set designs or whatever, that doesn't ring the bell to me. I mean, everything is a very, I don't know, superficial and doesn't really jive well with what we actually know about Korea. My big thing, for instance, throughout the entire show of Mr. Sunshine, whenever they were showing common people eating, having a meal, they will always have a large dish of 배추김치 on it. 배추김치 did not exist. This will shock so many people.
Paris baguette didn't either.
배추김치 as we know it did not exist in the 1890s and early 1900s. It was not. It was starting to becoming. I mean, well, first of all, 배추 did not exist in Korea until 1880s. It was the Chinese merchants who actually brought it over to Korea. So everything before it, we were just having gaktugis and maybe whatever radish kimchis we were having it. And gochu, of course, red pepper did not come into Korea until the late 1700s. So anything before that, of course, but then anything before that did not have any gochugaru in it.
Yeah.
But then of course I see dramas that are supposedly show Korea or Shilla. And they have a large bowl of kimchi somewhere with red pepper on it. And it's I mean, just do their homework. I mean, what's wrong with these people? And again, 배추 kimchi was not much of a thing until the early 1900s. It became more or less widespread, nationwide by the early 1930s. But no, before that, we didn't have much like that. So having every time I see kimchi,
get the kimchi right.
Yeah, just get rid of it. Either have gaktogi or dongchimi or whatever, anything else.
Yeah.
Just don't have just red petrogimchi, like large pot, like bowls of it. Like just don't do that. So
people today in the present are making a version of the past for the future. It's the same thing, I guess, that the cultural elites were doing.
But of course, it's not like cultural elites are doing. Of course, I mean, like it's more or less, of course, just so their vision of the Koreanness basically, had a life of its own. You just have. Like it just carries on. Like everybody has to wear like kat, or like they have to wear a pinyor and turumagi and what. No, if you go to if you have all these early 20th century photography and like photographs, historic photographs, film, like clips and whatnot, there are so many different forms of like hair, like headdresses, the stuffs that they wear, like whatever, like. Everything was different. Yeah. And of course, Joseon was a very strict. It had a very strict social and political hierarchies.
Right.
And everybody wore things differently, and there were restrictions on what you could wear or not, on the code of law. So things were very different now. Not everyone, wore kat, and of course, kat, the forms and shapes and the size of kats changed drastically over the last 400 years or so. I mean, like kats became extremely large at the turn of the 19th century, and it was until the 1860s that Daewongun actually actively put a law to squeeze the size of the kats to the ones that we actually now know. So the modern form of kat essentially is like cannot go back more than like early 1860s. So yeah, things are very different.
How do you feel when you pass by Gyeongbokgung and you see people in the various? I mean,
don't even get me started with this.
Because I see people doing black, and like they wouldn't be wearing black at that time.
Well, of course, I mean these are all just fantasy pieces, of course. I mean, and I have no problems of it so long as you don't pose. You don't push this as a kind of like authentic form of clothing.
Right.
I mean, like I have no problems with, people like tourists enjoying their moment, with this, like stuff. I mean, I don't have problems with it. But then, I don't know if they're still doing it or not, but CHA, the Cultural Heritage Administration, and now it's like Korean Heritage Service, KHS, I think it's called now. But anyway, until fairly recently, they would, they would have free admissions to all these, palaces if you're wearing a hanbok or something. And those types of hanboks, I'm saying. Just like, I mean, are you trying to encourage all these people that what you're wearing is, like authentic or period correct or whatever? Like, I mean, don't even do that.
They're thinking about Insta.
Yeah, it's all Instagram. It's all Instagram. It's publicity, and I mean, like, it is like I had to admit that, people has to admit that, like all the palaces are more or less. If you go to all these palaces, we have 5 palaces in Seoul, but then if you go there, you just feel like it's completely lacking history.
It looks
for some reason. I mean, well, even with historic buildings, like actual, like like not the reconstructions. I'm not saying like I have problems with the reconstructions, but then what I'm saying is, well, let's say if you like go to some kind of like a tour, with a tour guide on it. Do they actually tell you any history about it? They will talk about what they were used. What these buildings were for, and what kind of things, and how big this is or whatnot. Do they actually tell you what actually happened in here? No, they don't. They still like after all these years. I mean, they say it's improving, but I think it's a long way to go. I mean,
one of the tour guides told me that the rocks or the floor in Gyeongbokgung, when you go into through the main gate, the floor is uneven intentionally to make people keep their eyes down when they're walking. So
I don't know where on earth did that come from.
And in the first episode of Mr. Sunshine, he's a very famous actor. I forget his name now. He's on a horse and he tells young Eugene, Lee Byung-hun, don't look at the sky. The sky's not for you. You're a slave. You look down to the ground.
Hell no.
So the stones are not like that, because the palaces, people go there and they say this was built in 14, and I get people looking and going, that looks really new.
Well, I mean, a lot of it are like, I mean, Gyeongbokgung, of course, especially. well, they're still building up new buildings, right? They're going to continue this work until what, 2047? So what, 22 years away still.
Yeah.
So before they wrap it up. So, and they might actually do more than that. But you know, at least to the current plan that they have, you know, all the construction work would continue all the way up to 2047. So yeah, we still have like 4 different steps away before they complete the work. But Changdeokgung or other buildings and, you know, other palaces, you know, they are far much better preserved. We do have better preserved buildings, older buildings, and you know, Gyeongbokgung still has some older buildings left, but they barely try to do any make any distinctions between the reconstructions or the originals. You know, and which is also problematic.
I like the secret garden.
Oh yeah,
I don't know why, but I like being outside. It reminds me of being in sort of Hyde Park or the gardens of Buckingham Palace.
Yeah,
something like that. I don't know why.
I like the place as well. I mean, Changdeokgung honestly is my favorite palace, and you know, I'm telling you a little, I don't know, like personal side of things, but when my wife and I started dating many years ago, 15 years ago, I think. One of the first places that we actually went to for a date was Changdeokgung.
Wow.
But it so happened that before on that fateful day, it was strictly guided tour. You're not allowed to just go and roam about it. But then it just so happened that it was the first day of free tour. Like, at least for the palace part, not the garden. The garden is still guided tour. But so yeah, I went crazy because you had freedom. I finally have a free reign that I always dreamed about.
You might have been
and
a very
so somewhere
person.
along the way, I still don't remember this, but somewhere along the way, I let go of her. I was holding hands, but somewhere along the way, I let her go somewhere. So yeah, she was pissed. And so from this time, after all these years, 15 years later, she still says, my wife, I'm the most unfortunate woman in the world because, you know, everybody else, every other man, you know, falls for other women and other things. Why do I have to compete with a palace? You know, she keeps on doing that. So yeah, it's a public knowledge. So you have I disclose some big secret knowledge that you know nobody knows about. But you know, yeah. So yeah, but Changdeokgung is always my favorite, and that place does have a lot of layers of history to it. So many, especially Changdeokgung, because it was the longest used palace of all of them all. So many important events, historical events, all the major decisions that led to one another, all the major political decisions, economic decisions, and all the things that ran, that influenced Joseon, kingdom of Joseon as a whole. That happened a lot in that particular place, in all the buildings that we do have. So I really hope that somebody can actually come up with and actually tell you. You know what actually happened in these places, but again, it's far, it's still miles away. Not many people does that, and of course, but I can. So I did tours, as you probably know. I did tours for the Korean people, and of course for the foreigners. English speaking audience as well. And I tried my best to actually present some degree of actual history surrounding these buildings and palaces. So yeah.
Can you tell us anything about I'll get the name wrong, the Lotus Pond?
Which one?
Which one? I'm sure there's a lotus pond with a small pavilion in it and a big vertical bank in the secret garden.
Oh yeah, right.
I forget its name.
It's the Puyongji, and I know what it is. It's old. It is authentic. It's not a reconstruction. It's the pavilion.
Beautiful.
The pavilion and the pond dates all the way back to 1696. Wow. So yeah, it's a fairly old structure, and we do have a lot of prominent, a lot of things happen in there, and you have a large opening, sort of like a big open space in the middle of right next to it, and of course that's where sometimes every 2-3 years, I think, 3 years. Throughout the Joseon Dynasty, they had special forms of kwago, like the civil servant exams. So for those who really did good on these tests, they would actually bring these people to all the way back to that garden, that section over there, and the king himself would actually preside over the test for the special of the top of the cream of the top type of the top with these students, so that he will. So anyone who does first rate, or like any first top 5 people on this particular form of text would be instantly hired into the cabinet.
Wow.
So we have a lot of instances, and of course written accounts about these tests, and some of the prominent people, late Joseon politicians and scholars, who left their marks in history, passing through this particular section of the palaces, of the palace, and so it's an interesting place to be.
If you've thought Sunung was pressure, you've not had the king looking at you.
And you have about 50 people, 50 people chosen from the entire from the entire country. So you're literally you're competing against the top of the top people.
You might be doing it for your family as well, the lineage,
the lineage, and the privileges coming out of it once you become a minister. I mean, minister of the cabinet, for instance. Right. Goodness knows. I mean, what kind of things, all the glory, personal glories and things, and of course wealth that ensues. Coming out of it. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's an interesting story, but never in my life when I went to and like I said, the whole section is still they are still doing guided tours in these sections. I never heard a single tour guide, be it in English or in Korean, talking about this exam. Yeah, so I have problems. So can I have a little break?
Yeah. Certainly. Take a break. Just like that. That's what we'll do. Just play it, and then we'll talk about it. And if there's ever anything you want to talk about or don't want to talk about, you just do you, Jihoon. We're here to support you. So shall we play some records?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, well, why not? So, so let's put a couple of things now.
I'm still amazed about Arirang from the 1930s and Baechu Kimchi and
again, common misconceptions, and again, common misconceptions for everyone involved. I mean, not many Koreans know about this too.
Right.
Because again, we are so embedded, we have embedded ourselves so greatly into our understanding of our perception of Koreanness, and we can't really think about otherwise. But I think it could be problematic. It could be problematic in many ways because again, it did. I mean,
it would have been hard to question history during a dictatorship as well, especially with the Cold War, Nambu Gwanga. I think it's
Again, whenever I see all these people, and of course, I could decidedly see that, especially the younger. I was just briefly talking about me teaching college students once in a while, and having special lectures or something. But I could definitely feel that college students now have very little understanding of the context of what we were doing, what we have been doing with North Korea for the last 20-30 years. Of course, I'm not much older myself, but then I went through the 90s, early 2000s. I remember watching this was during the middle of the class in my elementary school. But I remember Kim Dae-jung coming down the steps of his plane, at Sunangongang in Pyongyang, and of course shaking hands with Kim Jong-il. I thought it was out of this world. I still vividly remember that, watching it at class on the TV that we had in the class, and all the major things and major steps, and all the
Sydney Olympics, not long after that, with the Tongil,
the Tongil stuff, the unification flag, and the peninsula and all that, and all the coming and going, and the traveling, and all that, Kumgangsan and Kaesong, and even Pyongyang for that matter. Yeah, I mean, we had all that. We had all that, and all of a sudden, starting in 2008, everything just went completely downhill, and of course now it's record low, I guess. So I don't know, but then people the younger people do not understand how things went, and it's for me it's a fairly recent development, all these tensions and animosities towards each other. It's a very recent thing for me. but whereas like most of the younger generations of people, the younger millennials and Gen Zs and whatever you call it, they don't grasp the context. They just don't know it, and they just assume that this was always the case, because as far as they can remember, like 2008 and onward, this was how it was.
Or by the same token, Pyeongchang felt new and exciting. The Pyeongchang Olympics with the unification flag and the women's hockey team. And I was like, well, 19 years ago it was like this. Have you heard the story about 1994 Kim Il-sung coming to Seoul to meet Kim Yong-sam, and then Kim Il-sung dying,
about it.
Kim Yong-sam not sending commemoration letters, and so that was that.
Of course, he died halfway through, so nothing ever occurred afterwards. But the word talks about it. The word talks about like summit talks as early as 1994, as you said. But of course, I also remember the time when I grew up in the good old-fashioned pangong, like anti-communist thing. So I remember, so I was literally the last generation of, last year, like before they abolished anti-communist indoctrination in elementary school for good.
When was that?
In 1998. Before that, so my first 3 years in elementary school, I went through that.
What was it like? I don't have any.
At this point, first of all, of course, on every June 25th, of course, you'll bring out some Korean War veterans that were still plentiful at the time, right? These people would come over to our school and give a little speech for us and all that. And I remember my first homework in my first year of elementary school, on June 25th, my homework was to make rice balls. 주먹밥. Just that we could actually feel the hardships of the people who were trying to escape from the north, North Korean soldiers and whatnot, and 꿀꿀이 whatever. That was crazy, and we had to do it. So can you imagine? I was 6. And trying to make 주먹밥, and they also insisted not to add any kind of seasoning to it.
Yeah,
because it's not going to be authentic. It's just menbap. Yeah, it's and 꿀꿀이죠. And how to make a 꿀꿀이죠, which is mulligan stew, whatever you call it. I don't know. I didn't know. And of course, and on that same day, I also remember we set up an effigy. Literally, we set up an effigy of Kim Jong-il and Kim Il-sung, I think. Even though Kim Il-sung has been dead for 2 years by this point. And so in the old days, when I think they might still doing it there, but not the effigy, but we had this thing called 공주머니. So you had little bean bag, small enough to hold it in your hand. You just toss it into this freaking effigy until it breaks. So I did all that. So I did that for 3 years in my first formal education. We did that. We threw things to the effigies of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il, and I don't know what we were doing. And of course, we sang the song 유교의 노래 이제야 어찌 우리 나를. Nobody sings this song anymore. Extremely militant song.
Does doing all this give you a different understanding of the North? Because what you seem to be doing is very anti-political. Everyone's political, but when you do stuff, and I see
I have my political understandings and I have my political opinions about things. But again, when you're talking about history, you have to be objective. I can, of course, I have my opinions about it. But I'm never gonna pick and choose of what I like in order to propagate my own understanding and my own opinions about things. We do have to we just have to just put everything on the table and just talk about it. And it's everybody else's opinion to pick and choose and whatever they like and whatever they see fancy or whatever. It's their job. It's the audience job, the student's job, not mine. That's what I do first. Again, that doesn't mean that I'm apolitical, because I do have my political feelings about it. But then, but then of course, Korea has too much politics in any sector, and of course right now, of course, especially the history sector, with all these with the current government right now, we have so many of these like political, like mayhem, like pandemonium, like having all these very like lopsided, opinionated people, like to be employed in this, like to be like to become the head of these institutions and governmental institutions, of course, which sanctions, which in effect sanctions this particular form and understanding of like political ideology and understanding of history, which I like detest. Of course, I mean that's not something you have to do. Like that's not what like that is quite detestable. So that's just how I feel about it. But yeah. No, North Korea. I don't know. Like, I mean, my first memory of North Korea was, of course, the death of Kim Il Sung. I was a kindergarten student. I was in the kindergarten, and it so happened that my kindergarten was the kindergarten that I went to was operated by a church, and the pastor of the church, which we called, well, he was 목사님, but we didn't call him 목사님. We called him 원장님 because we were part of the kindergarten. Yeah. Wichuan. But then, I think about it, he was from the north. He was in his early 60s, I think, at the time. So he probably was born around in the early 1930s and grew up in the north before like coming down and became a whatever. He was an old man and very, I don't know, not so energetic at all. Like he was always dozing off, like around lunchtime. But then I still vividly remember when so we were taking we had lunch, and of course after lunch usually the teachers would actually encourage us to and this was early July, to take a nap after eating lunch. But then 10 minutes into that, I hear this preacher 원장님 shouting out loud, 김 일성이 죽었다, 김 일성이 죽었다, and he was dancing. Yeah. So that was my my first very vivid memory of it. Of course, I didn't know who he was. My first reaction was like, how can anyone be so happy when somebody's died? Somebody has died. But of course, I didn't know anything about North Korea. I didn't know anything about Kim Il Sung at the time. But then, that was my first very vivid memory of it. And then, of course, we talked about and of course, as I grew, of course, we had in the late 90s, of course, we had this, invasive missions, so to speak, agents, through coming through the south through submarines and whatnot. I mean, that happened when I was pretty young. So yeah, and of course until I was in the third grade, of course, we did this anti-communist thingy without even knowing what that was. But then starting in 99, early 2000s, then the whole peace talks and summit talks, and all these North Koreans coming and going, and the Kumgangsan thing, and Chung Ju-young having all these herds of cows sent to the north and all that. So it was exciting times, I think. And later on, I was fortunate enough to meet and befriending a lot of North Korean defectors over the years, and it also, in fact, affected me greatly on how I actually ended up thinking about North Korea, and these are all humans, right? Yeah. I mean, they are all humans, and the regime is detestable, but you're talking about regular humans, regular human beings having their lives, and they have their own stories, they have things, and they have their ups and downs and things. Yeah, so
we might live under detestable regimes sometimes, but we're still human as well. One of my North Korean defector friends, when I asked her, she said she didn't study Han. It wasn't taught to them. Yeah. It's part of South Korea.
Because Han was again Han, Heung, mud, whatever you call it. These are all social construct.
What was the third one?
Mud, 멋있는 mud.
Oh, okay.
Something like that. Han, Heung, and all the other things. Especially Han. Yeah. Han was not necessarily brought into prominence until the 1920s, and the first people who actually like talked so endlessly about those things were Japanese art historians, particularly people like Yanagi Muneyoshi, who was still very like seen very positively by the Korean people today, because he was publicly supporting Korean causes, Korean whatever. So he was quite liberal politically in Taisho Japan, Taisho era Japan, and he was and he also like supported Korean causes for many times, and of course he loved Korean art. He collected Korean art, and of course his the museum that he founded in Japan, in Tokyo, it is one of the largest collections and art collections in Japan that still has like a lot of Korean folk art. But then he also had his limits, because he was the one. It's more or less closer to what we now say, collectively call noble savage, the notion of noble savage, because these are the defeated, but they are like, they have the culture, they have they have some noble aspects to it, whereas of course like to the eyes of Yanagi, he thought of modern Japanese as somebody who was jaded, polluted by the modern modern cultures and societies and economics. But then he saw Koreans as some kind of like this primordial innocent pure people. So again, his understanding of like Koreanness is problematic in its way. But then it was he who first extensively wrote about Han as the core tenets of the Korean culture, because it was, in his way, he thought that Koreans were very passive people. Hardly unlikely. It is very unlikely, but highly unlikely. But then he saw Koreans were very passive. So when they had this kind of resentment in their heads, they will just, instead of like, let's say instead of rising against the oppressors, or the cause of like their suffering, they will just like internalize it, and that becomes Han. So that's the whole idea. And he was the first one who will actually come up with that. But somehow, because of course Korea had undergone so many hardships, and of course we had political oppressions and dictatorships and whatnot, so a lot of internalized resentment was definitely happening throughout much of the 20th century Korea, especially in the South. And many South Korean artists, writers, literature critics, ended up employing this over and over and over and over. And of course it became so synonymous with the culture now. But of course, you can't now, starting with K waves and everything, you cannot really explain the K waves, like the booming of K waves with Hanyu, with Han. So it's now Heung, out of nowhere. I don't know where it came out. I mean probably in the late 90s, but I could not pinpoint like who started it. Probably people like Arirang, maybe.
Heung is more of a joyous feeling.
Joyous
isn't it?
feeling.
It's a cheer.
But then it is just like arbitrary thing. I just find it so silly.
Some essentialism.
Essentialism. Trying to there are so many complicated context, and nooks and crannies of culture, in any culture for that matter. But why do you simplify all these things into just one term, word terminology that is even almost near impossible to define. What is wrong with you? So people do this all the time, though, and even today, whenever they see about things, cultural anthropology papers and whatever, I sometimes, I sometimes go into people, because I write about things, and of course I publish articles and things. I occasionally get, once in a while, get some, somebody sends these papers to review them for the peer-reviewed journals, and a lot of cultural anthropology papers that I had to go through lately, a few months ago, several, 2-3 of them, they all had Han in it, and it's Not again. I mean,
some of my international students love the
oh
idea
yeah,
of
I mean,
it's the door. Are we allowed to talk about Tong? Does John?
No, like yeah, we need like 5 more hours for that. No, I can't do that.
Is jog acceptable or not? Or is no? Please.
No, honestly, yeah. My honest opinion is that no. I wouldn't. I would stay away from it. Like it's all so arbitrary and simple. And it has so little of explanatory power. I mean, why would you bother with it? Because, like, without anything having sufficient explanatory power, so long. I mean, like, of course, they try to make an argument out of this, like so many people do. But no, I honestly have problems with it, and I think it's really silly just to stick with these types of buzzwords or whatever terminologies. I don't get it. So I'm completely going against it. So anybody who would use these things to justify whatever they wanted to write, I mean, there are some people who are like that, and I have no patience for these people, honestly. I do not have any patience for them. I try to be cordial, but
Yeah, everybody approaches things in a different way, and you've already spoken about the complexity with Korean Buddhists favoring not all of them, some of them favoring Japan, and then a Japanese person favoring the Koreans in a way. And so I guess you spoke about the difficulties of growing up and being educated with Pangong or anti-communism and the Kim Il-sung piñatas or Kim Jong-il piñatas. I love this idea. It feels to me sometimes that colonization or Korea-Japan relations is probably the hardest thing to ever approach. And you don't have to address this in any particular way, but a lot of the things that you post and you do work on is coming from 1920s, 1930s. You've spoken to about Arirang. Do you have any observation or how we approach the sensitivity of this, or how we... Because I feel the pressure sometimes of it. I want to say, put the cards on the table and let's be objective, exactly as you say. And when that topic comes out, I feel I'm going to be a bit careful here.
And of course, personally, I have been, there were many moments when, like, for instance, I have a number of friends who are married to Japanese people, like Americans or British or like whatever, who are married to Japanese. And, I have been asked many, many times when we got, like friendly enough and, whatnot, and they will say, oh, do you hate the Japanese? I don't hate the Japanese. I mean, as a people, like that's exactly what I say with the North Koreans or anyone for that matter. I don't have personal grudges against any Japanese people or anyone who is decent and cordial and, courteous enough in their daily lives. But then, you have... But then, when it comes to talking about all the history stuff and of course the politics and whatnot, I have problems with it. I have a very strong opinion about them. I don't really necessarily talk about this much. But then when what I can say this, there's no one correct way of talking about or making assessments about the past. I mean, be it like whatever history you're dealing with, not just about Korea-Japan relations. But then we have to understand that we do have a lot of intricacies, so sensitive, like a lot of sensitive topics and subjects that we have to address objectively, just matter of fact, between Japan and Korea. But then of course it is far from perfect, of course, because again, a lot of Japanese, first of all, most Japanese people don't even know what happened. Like they never teach any of these things in schools.
That's right.
They know nothing about it. And if you're banging on apologies for the people who doesn't even know anything about any of the atrocities or any of the stuff, what is the point? You're it is just I don't know, it's just not useful at all. But you do need to have some form of you do need to encourage the Japanese people to to raise awareness about their colonial, their imperial past and a few things. But of course it's far it's easier said than done. because again, like the Japanese education system is as frustrating as what they have in Korea too. I mean, it's very test driven, and if anything is test driven, there's hardly any leeway for introducing anything other like outside of the curriculum or like test subjects. We don't have those, and we don't have the luxury. They don't have the luxury. So then, of course, the civil. I mean, so there are many different ways of doing so, and like raising awareness on each end, on both ends, and of course, Koreans on the other hand, be it North Korea or South Korea, they do have tendency to whitewash and how to put this, glorify the past. In the sense that, of course, everybody had to fight against the Japanese. Everybody fought against the Japanese. Everybody was so nationalistic. Everybody was, anti-Japanese. And the Japanese, of course, plundered and exploited and raped, all these people. No, that's not the case. Nothing is black and white. And even today, for that matter. I mean, even though I personally do not like this current government that we have in Korea, with South Korea. But then, does that apply to everyone? No, that does not apply to everyone. And some people would flourish in this social conditions. Others wouldn't. It was exactly the same in the colonial period, during the colonial period. But of course, we do have intricacies of colonizers versus the colonized, and all the different needs and all the different needs and demands that different parts of the society would demand throughout time. It is a tragedy of its own that many of these most of these wishes and demands that many, the majority of the Korean people, as the mass, was never materialized. I mean, it took many years, decades, for them that any of their wishes, to be more egalitarian, to be more, to be more. I mean, to have more opportunities and whatnot, to have more autonomies in their social cultural or social political decisions and whatnot. I mean, it took decades for us to have any of these things to materialize in one way or the other. So what I'm saying is, I know it's I'm almost babbling now, but what I'm saying is I have to I think people has to avoid this very strong black and white black and white war view or view. I mean, just opinions about the past, and just let the historians do the work. More, I mean, I'm saying this just one after another, but historians are not necessarily saying things about I mean, they're not dismissing the Japanese colonization as the pure evil. I mean, it's not pure evil. That's something that I have to always that's something that I always wanted to say to all the others whenever I'm talking about Korea's Korea-Japan relations and the colonial past. Colonialism was bad, but it's not necessarily evil. It's bad, but then there was no colonization. I mean, colonial rule and everything. It is bad, and there was some degree of wickedness in it. But I wouldn't designate it as something of a pure evil, something that is demonic or satanic or whatever you call it. It's nothing like that. So you have to understand that. Why I'm saying this? It's because so many people, so many Koreans, and to a certain extent to all the other people, they do not understand about they have this misunderstanding of the Japanese colonial authorities were almost omnipotent. They could control over anything, every aspect of the colonial colonial Korean autonomy, their daily lives or anything. No, That was not the case. In fact, I think the more or less of an academic consensus that we now have in like Korean academia, especially historians, is that it was far from being omnipotent. It was grossly incompetent. The colonial rule that they ever employed, even in the best of times, it was grossly incompetent, inefficient, and just poorly managed.
Sounds like a government.
Yeah. But then, like Japan at the time was, it was far from being a world power. They had their own problems. In fact, they were almost at the brink of being colonized at one point, especially in the late 19th century and onward. Their standing in international affairs was very perilous. So, and they did not necessarily modernize themselves as they claimed to be. It was more of a show, really. In its core, it was grossly incompetent. Well, I tell you this. Korea, the Japanese colonial government, the governor general, government general office, they could not tax Koreans properly until 1935, 25 years into their colonial rule. It was not until 1935 when they finally did the census, finished the census, and began to tax people. It took 25 years for them to go through the surveys and whatnot. They had. You're talking about maybe thousands, maybe a couple of thousands of people. Authorities and civil servants working for the entirety of the whole peninsula, with 25 million people on board. Yeah, it took them 25 years before they could even tax anyone.
It's not a totalitarian Big Brother regime.
No, it was nothing like that. No, it was not hardly from micromanaging. And they, of course, they always make fake surveys and fake statistics and so. Anybody who really relies on surveys and statistics from the 1920s and 30s before mid 1930s, you have to admit that these data have problems, severe problems. And of course, most historians who do their research knows these problems. We are not completely dismissing them, but then we have to compensate what we know about the problems with these data. And have to compensate that. So historians do their job. Most people do not say that oh, these are the evil. It was form of pure evil that they had nothing but to exploit Koreans and to their heart's content. No,
that feels like Pamyo.
Yeah,
a little bit. The movie I'm talking about. Yeah. But there was a demonic evil.
And I'm genuinely surprised about the whole Pamyo and how billions of people had watched it and loved it. And the whole 천만영화. And the whole feng shui thing, the feng shui and the grave and the whole well, I thought it pretty much died out in the 90s. In the 90s it was big. I remember people talking about you had feng shui masters on the talk show and talking about stuff and all that nonsense. I thought we passed down that area, and it's a thing of the past. It was just a little bit of culture phenomenon in the 90s, but then now Pamyo, and of course everyone jumped on it, and I love the acting. The actors did a fine job on that, every one of them. But then the whole plot and the whole the device, the whole plot device, and burying this pro-Japanese guy in the spot and cut up the jimek or whatever, the cheese. What are you talking about? It's I was genuinely surprised to see all that plot devices coming back. And of course, everybody all the young viewers who saw it thought of this as a fresh new idea. It's not. I've seen it dozens, gazillion times actually in my younger years. Now it's just making a comeback, so to speak. But then apparently it's still very popular. Yeah. And of course, again, we are losing a lot of people who actually experienced through the colonial period, and even the worst amount of atrocities and exploitations. Starting with comfort women survivors, and all that. We are losing all these people, and of course, by doing so, we only have this abstract idea of colonial, this evil colonialism, just exploiting like every nooks and crannies of Korean life and all that. No, that was not the case. I mean, no. Yeah, I can go on and on and on, but
Shall we play some music?
Oh yeah, we should.
How about that? I mean, after all that, and some of this music is from that period, you were saying.
So let's say, like I said, the most prominent forms of like so-called traditional music that we had developed since the colonial period, late colonial period, 1930s and onward, were like two folk songs, Arirang and 도라지 타령, or 도라지. Both of which are modern creations. These are, I mean, they do have some basis, like I said, basis in like pre-modern like Korean folk tunes and like lyrics, but then the modern form of it, the song itself, is very like modern. Like our earliest recording of Arirang, for instance, the way this particular Arirang that we know of does not go back before 1928. And of course, it actually is actually an offshoot of the film, the 1920, the famous, of course, like lost film, 1926 film. It was it was the music. It was actually incidental music for that film, but then of course, it became like got so ingrained into the Korean psyche ever since. But then anyway. So if you go to the website, if you go to online, if you go to on YouTube, and there's a YouTube channel where this enthusiast, so to speak, is determined to post every known versions of Arirang in the world.
Okay.
Ever since the days of the colonial period. But then he is always like this particular channel owner is very has a very strong opinions about why the Japanese were commercializing Arirang and all these things, which are all of our own, and why they were doing all this. And there were also, of course, by doing so, by default, it's all distorted and whatnot. No, it was the Japanese and Korean. It was collaborative work that they did to commercialize them. And of course, Arirang and 도라지 became so synonymous with Korean culture, even to the Japanese. So it did not stop them for. Even, I mean, during the colonial days, and of course, even after the liberation, like those two tunes, like were stuck in the Japanese psyche as well as distinctively Korean.
Yeah.
So yeah, it didn't stop them to commercialize them and commercially exploit them, like in a way or whatever. But anyway, so I'm gonna play a couple of selections here. So first,
for those that are just listening, can you describe what you've brought into the studio?
Oh yeah, so I brought my trusty old portable, phonograph or gramophone. It's a mechanical device. It does not require any electricity, so I'm not plugging in any of this. So I'm just winding the handle to wind the spring inside, like so.
That's amazing. It doesn't require electricity.
Yeah, and it does not require any electricity, but it's going to be very loud. Of course, if you go to see some period dramas and whatnot, like they always try to show these things in the background, and of course it seems like it's kind of like in the background music. No, you cannot listen to this in like after dark, after the dark, because it can be so loud. I mean, I can't play this in the evening. But anyway, so because it has no volume control, by the way.
Isn't that where the expression "put a sock in it"?
Put a sock in it literally comes out of this expression because the only way to muffle the sound of this device was to literally to put socks in it, to muffle it. Anyway, so I'm gonna play three selections, I think, first. These are all versions of Arirang.
Will they get copyright struck if I put it on?
No, probably not. And even if they do, it's bogus. So don't worry about it. So let's see what I can do.
For the Arirang enthusiast online, here's an Arirang story for you. There was a competition to write renditions of Arirang, and my band did a stoner rock version of Chindo Arirang, and we won. And we got to perform in front of Gyeongbokgung with dynamic duo in front of a stage of many people.
Oh, Okay.
I was really like, I'm sure Korean enthusiasts of Arirang won't like my version, but the judges did.
So we're gonna start with a variation of Arirang from I think 1935 or 36, I think. So a lot of these records, especially the Korean ones, they are in rough shape, largely because they were played to death. These things are played with steel needles like this, as you can see over here, and these things wear down these records. So I cannot play these things quite often, like as often as much as I do. But of course, I do like modern equipment to digitize and archive these things. But anyway, so here we have a version of Arirang around 1936. Notice that I actually pulled out this little pin, the needle, because this wears down pretty quickly. So each time you play a record in the old days, you have to change the needle. So there's a little compartment here, as you can see. There's a little compartment where I store all these fresh new needles. And so I'm gonna change the needle and try to play the next one. So this is from 1936. It's sort of like a variation of the old Arirang, but then you still get the basic melody of things. But then of course, from then on, I'm going to play another one. So this is from 1936. So this one, it's called Song of Arirang. Do we have to do something? It's called the Song of Arirang. It's sung by this singer by the name of Grace Amemiya, who was Nisei, Japanese American singer, and it's sung in English, I think. But then this was done. This was recorded in 1950. So and this record you will find everywhere. If you go on eBay or anywhere, you'll find hundreds of these things, copies of this thing, because it was a smash hit among the GIs stationed in Korea during the Korean War years. So you'll find hundreds of these copies of it. It's one of the most common records. But this practically sent off, all the things that we know of, this was probably Arirang's first international. Besides outside of Japan, that is international exposure to the rest of the world. But anyway, so Grace Amemiya singing the Song of Arirang. I'm not sure if this is Japanese or English, but she did both versions. But anyway, I'm doing this. This is Japanese, actually. I'll put this here. So yeah, so this sold like hotcakes to to hundreds and thousands of like GIs, American GIs stationed in Korea. And of course, yeah, I was a little bit like confused about it, but yeah, she's actually singing in English. But anyway, from this on, they had a variety of, and of course, if you look at on the label here, it says arranged by Raymond Hattori, who was a famous Nisei Japanese composer / arranger of pop songs, very prominent in Japan in the 1950s and 60s. Anyway, so again, so it's already you have a lot of international aspect to it. So you have American-born, two American-born Japanese, people of Japanese ethnicity involved in this recording, but the song is of course Korean per se, but you have a Japanese studio orchestra playing the tune and the back, and of course recorded in Tokyo. So and sold it, and they were extensively sold to the GIs, stationed in Korea and Japan, of course, occasionally coming and going, of course. So from this on, you have another arrangement. This is from 1952, recorded in late 1951, but it's Arirang Begin. Begin is a type of it's a similar to foxtrot. It's a kind of like West Indies type of music, dance music. And of course, there was a Cole Porter song by the name of Begin to Begin, which was a very popular tune in the 1930s. Anyway, so here we have one singer by the name of Clark Johnston, who was actually a major in the U.S. Air Force stationed in Japan, but he also moonlighted as a singer singing for the U.S. troops stationed in Korea and Japan. And so and also notice there's a Jay Watson as the arranger or composer. That's Johnny Watson, who was also another U.S. officer, military officer, who was also moonlighted as a ranger / band leader for the troops. Anyway, so, and I think this is for what it is, I think it's a fairly interesting arrangement and adaptation of the song. And I think I'm just going to play this in full because I kind of like this one. And of course, because this is an American singer singing in English. It actually has, I think it's, the English lyrics, it's a different translation. But I think, it's much more, I think, it's more enjoyable and understandable, I think. this is a fairly nice rendition, I think.
It's definitely got the big band feel. It's so fascinating to hear it sung in English.
Yep, and there were many more. I just brought a handful here, and of course I can't, but you know, this is not a music program as far as I know.
It's whatever we want it to be. It is now.
And I'm gonna play the next batch of recordings. This time 2 of them. I think we probably have some time for probably play the entirety of those 2.
Okay.
So these things. So this is gonna be another like interesting song, which is Toraji, and Toraji is also like modern creation, so to speak. Our earliest recording of it does not, or like written reference. There was no written reference about it. Our earliest recording of it comes from 1932, and it actually is copyrighted by the Japanese Columbia Step composer.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it was a creation of some kind. But then it quickly spread into like something, and many people just simply slightly modified it to get away with the like copyrights and whatnot, and so yeah, it became quite popular, and even in the 1930s, if you actually read through some of the so I have this tour guide book which I didn't bring, and it's in Japanese. It's a tour guide book for all these like wealthy businessmen types. And much of it concerns a lot about how to deal with Kisaengs. Okay. So yeah, it's rather questionable type of thing. But anyway, so at the end of that pamphlet, you have a section where they talk about what would be the best kind of souvenirs that you can buy so that you can actually give some gifts like to your like loved ones and your friends. And one of it, like in the section at the end of that section, they actually talk about, you just want to buy records records of Arirang or Toraji. So yeah, already in the mid-30s this was becoming quite synonymous with the notion of Koreanness among the Japanese, and of course same applies to the Koreans too. So this is another like version from 1936, and this is probably our 3rd version, recorded version of it. Anyway, so I'm gonna play this thing in its entirety, and after that, what I'm gonna do is to play this recording. It's called simply Song of Korea, Peoria, and so it's a Toraji. The tune is Toraji, but of course it's completely like it's in English, but it's completely. I mean, the lyrics are completely changed, and it's sung by this African American singer who was also a GI by the name of Richard Bowers. And so here it is. We actually have this what they call lyric sheet. And it actually has the complete lyrics on it, so you might actually try to show it to you, show your audience what this is later on when I play the English version. Anyway, so enough of that, and I'm just gonna play the 1935 version first. They also have the lyrics. They also have the Japanese translation of the English. you notice that the even though the music itself is generally like folksy in general, but the accompaniment is entirely modern. This is all modern orchestra. Like it has no Korean instruments in it. So already this was at the very beginning of it. This was a form of shinminyo, like new types of folk song that was specifically written like to modernize and to modernize the folk songs that we now that Koreans had. And,
recorded in Seoul?
Probably not in Japan. Probably. This happens with old records. There's a little bit of an imperfection on the surface, and sometimes it jumps, skips.
So from 1936, we've gone to that in 2024, and Ive is still singing about Hey Ya. Nothing's changed. It's still the Hey Ya.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me. Everything's on the 3-beat. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. We have that kind of waltz or quick step feel, whereas today most of modern music is in a 4/4.
So I'm going to change into like Song of Korea, which is again the English version of it. And what is very interesting about this particular song, this particular version, is that the lyrics is very topical. It is very Korean War related, as you can see. It does use some, I don't know, like some of the words that they like without actually knowing the context, it might be a little bit difficult to understand what he is singing. But for those who actually know a little bit about Korean War or the Cold War politics of the time, you will find out. Anyway, so the English version from 1951 or 52.
Here's the story of a Ph.D. in Kikioria. He could sing louder than any 3 or maybe 4 of you, but his only song was about the town of Peoria. Peoria, Peoria, Peoria. It wasn't that he did not like the life in Peoria. It was just that he liked to shout and sing of Peoria. Peoria, Peoria, Peoria. Korea, 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 Kikioria. He left Ma and Pa for him so in Arkansas. His daughters should have read W.T.B. Peoria, but instead of P, someone hit the P for Kikioria. Peoria, Peoria, Peoria. It wasn't that he did not like his home in Peoria. It was just that he shouted constantly of Peoria. Peoria, Peoria, Peoria. to Peoria. Yours truly, Joe, Joe, the one you know, and Mama Scalia. Mascali, Mascali, Mascalia. P.S. It's wet on her hat, and my little cousin Gloria. Can't find peace without always hearing shots of Peoria. Peoria, Peoria, Peoria.
Amazing.
So the third lyrics, the third verse is actually very Cold War politics. So he talks about, I think, what was it? I mean,
Uncle Joe sending a letter to...
Yeah, so he says, till the telegram was sent to the man of Missouri. Of course, that refers to Harry Truman, because he's from Independence, Missouri. And of course, Joe from Moscow, of course, is Stalin. So yeah, so please finish this damn war so that I can go back to Peoria or whatever it is. So it's a very topical song. But anyway, and I actually checked on who this was, Richard Bowers, and he is from Peoria. So,
oh wow.
So Arkansas. So yeah, it's actually almost semi like autobiographical. So I think so it has its own like charms, but anyway, so yeah, this is just pretty much it. I'm sorry that the some of you might have noticed that the sound has deteriorated at the end of it because the needle wore out much quicker than it should be, but it happens. You know.
Do you have a DJ name?
No. I don't. I wish I had.
Yeah, we'll have to give you someone. We'll have to give you one.
Maybe.
DJ Peoria.
Maybe. I don't know. So here's the label. Anyway, so this is how it is. He actually made a hit with this song called Gomenasai. Gomenasai, and and it's about like American GI leaving a Japanese woman behind and to go back and whatever. So it's also interesting in its own way because we all know about pang women and like these Japanese women having relations with same thing happened in Korea too.
Yeah.
But of course, the pang-pangs of the 1940s and 50s Japan, like there are so many songs and films, contemporary films and things about these people, and these Americans even wrote songs about. So yeah, I don't know. It's like it's all pretty fascinating, and but without actually even knowing the context of the Cold War politics and of course Korean War and how all these average GI, and of course the singer himself was a GI, like average GI Joe. So yeah, I mean, like without knowing any of the context, it'll be near impossible to understand what he's trying to sing in this thing. So, or like any of the topical stuff that he is singing on the other side, or any of the stuff. So, he pretty much just like the other guy, Clark Johnston and this Richard Bowers, both of them fell into obscurity, of course, because they just lived ordinary lives after like their military time ended. But anyway, so I found I had to track these people down because through online obituaries and all these different things because they had normal lives. I mean, just uneventful, normal lives. But thanks to the internet, you still manage to find some of these people. And anyway. Yeah, so
and you hear the importance of melody, you hear the importance of people's lives, but how pop music or contemporary music, about a repetitive sound, I'm sure that we could all walk out this room and you could ask us, you remember that song? And we could probably hum a little bit of it, or we could recognize some of it. That's really nice. When you played the versions of Arirang, and you said it was sort of 1930s around there, was the dance there? When I think of Arirang, I immediately do a wavy arm motion. I can see you immediately getting uncomfortable, but I'm not bunking it up though. If you do Arirang, you kind of do this. And so was that there at the time? Was that
probably,
something else?
I mean, something like that. But Arirang had so many different manifestations of things.
Yeah.
And the word I don't have I didn't bring it with me, but there were one of the most fascinating versions of Arirang recorded in the colonial period is this jazzed up version of it.
Okay.
But not just any ordinary jazz. It's a French jazz.
Yeah.
There was the so
like gypsy French jazz, like Django Reinhardt type jazz. Or
almost like a French accordion, kind of like
Parisian
type of
yeah,
things.
yeah.
So what happened was in 1931. The original Moulin Rouge in Paris closed down because they had a fire the previous year, and they had to, like, before they rebuilt this. The people, the musicians working for the Moulin Rouge, was on a tour, an international tour, and they ended up in Japan for a while, and they actually ended up staying almost a year in Japan. But then somehow somebody approached them to record a whole bunch of recordings for the Korean market, and they ended up recording a version of Arirang with complete with accordions, very Frenchy, Parisian sound. But it's a fascinating thing, and of course we do know that this was very popular. I mean, we only have so many of these early Korean commercial sound recordings have been lost because nobody was taking care of them, and there was no archive or libraries who had kept these things. These were considered to be disposable back in the day. But anyway, so we've only have 3 copies of this record known to exist at this point, but then all of them were very well loved, let's put it that way. And we do have references about this record being played in dance halls in Seoul and anywhere. So people probably danced to it. I don't know what kind of dances that they did. Apache dances? I don't know. The Parisian,
the can or something.
Or I don't know. It's some kind of Parisian. I don't know. But they had those. They had jazz band versions. They had all kinds of different versions. Arirang is probably the most prominently commercialized Korean folk song of all kind. I mean, and even after the war, even after liberation. One of the first recordings that that Koreans were sending. So around 1948, 49, there were some recordings catering towards international audience. Either the Korean government or the broadcasters, they were trying to make some souvenir, not for sale kind of records, and they all have Arirang versions of Arirang in it. Either vocal versions of it, but when I say vocal, it's not Korean vocal. It's more like a Western classical operatic kind of a vocal art version of it. So it had so many different manifestations of it, and
who thought history was boring? We've talked about sex, prostitution, and music. We've spun records. Come on, Jihoon, you're the man.
I haven't even I didn't have much time even to delve with my other specialty, which is of course about films. But of course, films are kind of difficult to show on podcasts, but because it's all audio. But still, there are plenty of things that I can talk about films. Hopefully, I don't know, maybe. If you can have me another time, maybe I'll try to do something a little bit more about it.
I've sat here just in amazement about all the learning that I've been doing, and I'm very thankful for your time. Before, we're asked to leave this room, and I am very grateful for your time, Jihoon. What have you learned about history? I mean, what has this done to you? Because we all have different fields and we all do different things, and what I get from you is that you have a deep sympathy and empathy for people. You seem to take a very humanist approach. Some people will study theory and abstract and ideology, and I'm putting words in your mouth here, and I don't mean to do that. Through all the study and the deep research and passion that you do, what have you learned? What has it taught you?
Well, I mean, I don't know. It's so difficult to just answer it in a simple sentence or two, but. History is not something you can just one of the common misconceptions that people always have about history is that it's something that you have to memorize, and you have to just do it for the test and whatever. It's boring because it's all numbers, dates, years, and whatnot. No, it's not that. So the big narrative in history, of course, it's a series of cause and effect, and the cause, something happens, and of course something else comes out of it as a result, and that kind of thing. So it's very in that way it's also very human, because that's how any human beings would actually live their lives. You do something out of their out of your reasoning or whatever they have in their minds, and just play it out, and according to their reasoning, and of course it will lead to something else, and of course like from then on, of course you're doing the same thing over and over again, the same process. But again, like, history is very human, and it's not something that you have to, let's say, overly like glorify, or even like like try to just like downplay its importance. I mean, it's none of those. But I think overall, learning and studying history in general really gives you an opportunity, at least for me, that is, to have more nuance and understanding, and like more better understanding, more contextualized understanding of the world that we're living in. Because again, the world we are living in, no matter what you say, anyone says, is in fact, of course, the result of all the historical activities and outcomes that we that we had gone through, and all humanity has gone through, like some degree of some form of history overall, and so it does give me, I think, or anyone who studies it, some more nuanced and contextualized like understanding of the world that we're living in, and I think that's already quite. I know I can't really ask much more. It's it's something that is quite special and unique in its own way. So yeah, so that's how I would describe that. So
it's beautiful, Jihoon. To close out, if I can ask you recommendations, book, movie, drama, film, song, just 2 or 3 things to throw at us, please. I get the feeling they're going to be from the 1930s.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
anything. Yeah,
I can't remember. I can't really say. There's so many things to do.
What's a book somebody should read? What's a film somebody should watch? What's an album someone should listen to?
Well, since we just discussed about film briefly, no, I wouldn't really necessarily say. Again, like, it's so near impossible for me just to pick one and just try to do so. But no, as for the films are concerned, as for something about Korea and Korean history in general, let's just start with the this YouTube channel run by KOFA, Korean Film Archive, the National Archive. Every film, so they post full length feature films for free. Anyone can watch them. And of course, you can start off with some of our earliest films, earliest surviving Korean films from the from 1930s and onwards. So our earliest surviving one is from 1934, and you have pretty much every film that has survived to the present time. Anything that was made before 1950. All the important ones, especially the colonial films, which is so far and few between. Of course, we only have 13, 14 of them surviving to the present time out of hundreds. But we can start from there, because that's really in your face, to tell you what kind of what was the life like. Of course, you have to contextualize everything. You have to you cannot take everything in face value, because again, judgment calls was made, and there are quite a lot of films that does definitely have some degree of, some degree of limits of the day, so to speak. Japanese colonialism, of course, obviously, and all these things. But then. Yeah, it's a great way to start. It's a great way to start, and then of course, there are so many other great films made in the 50s and 60s and 70s that are just available for free.
Housemaid's on there.
Yeah, Housemaid, of course. The Housemaid. My favorite, my personal favorite is this thing called The Aimless Bullet.
Yeah.
Obertan.
Yeah, I like that too.
And 1961. And of course, in the same year, the 60s, especially Korean cinema of the 60s, they call the 1960s as the golden era of Korean cinema, because so many of the masterpieces and the prominent films, and of course the way that the industry came into being in Korea, the film industry in general, was pretty much the 1960s thing. And my personal favorite of all is the is this thing called the A Coachman Mabu, a 1961 film, which is about this house. The father is a coach driver, like horses, horse carriages, and it's about a family. It's a like poor family, sort of like a. Not necessarily like humanistic kind of a thing. I mean, it's like but it has ups and downs, and of course, it really is very realistic. I think it's a very realistic depiction of everyday working class, everyday life of a working class people of early 1960s Korea. So it's a must watch. I think it's a very well put together, and it actually was one of the first films to have international recognition because it won the what was it called? It won an award at the Berlin International Festival in 1962. It's a very well made film, and there are many more. Of course, The Housemaid is one interesting film, very shocking for its time, even today. And of course, the whole finale, the ending, and everything. It's quite shocking, even in today's standards.
I heard they had to tag on an extra ending for the censors.
Yeah.
That it was like, it was all basically a dream, by the way.
Yeah,
like, it didn't really happen.
But then, I mean, overall, even with that,
it's an amazing movie.
It's an amazing film. And, and 60s, 70s, and onward, of course, different genres of things. Even the ones like the hostess genre of the 1970s, 별들의 고향, and like the stars coming to like hometown and all that. Which is all about gender. I mean, if you want to understand the modern concept about gender and like sexuality and the female, like how females are portrayed, and like as they say, either a slut or a saint, as they say.
That's right.
Like if you want to go see the prominent example of how it was culturally depicted at the time, you got to watch some of these things. So films are very easy access of how to understand like the Korean society and Korean culture, social cultural like norms and gender norms, political like context and everything. So yeah, it's a must watch. So be sure to subscribe to all these channels and whatever. Ko-fi is not paying me for that. I work for them. I work for a lot of research projects with them, but I'm not paid by them. No, I mean this is just me suggesting. And once in a while, you might see some commentary videos featuring me on it. Like I have shot a few over the years. Anyway, so. But
we're not paying you either, and we're very grateful for your time today, Jihoon. Thank you very much. Yeah. And that's a wrap. Let's keep that there. Wow.
Thank you.
That was
but did we actually have some kind of like what I call it? Like, did we have a proper intro?
No.
Don't think we did. But are you going to? I mean. Is it like? I mean, are you okay with it? I mean, like as is.
That's how we started. That's real, isn't it? I mean, we just started talking about Kisaeng,
all kinds of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's real.